Everyone laughed when I walked into the boardroom as the new CEO. The same executives who once called me soft and too emotional now sat in stunned silence. My father, who had built this company with calloused hands and an even more calloused heart, couldn't look me in the eye. His face was ashen as I took my place at the head of the table. His table, now mine. "Gentlemen," I said, placing my hands on the polished mahogany, "I believe we have some changes to discuss." 5 years ago, my father had stood in this very room and announced that I was too weak to run the family business. He'd chosen my younger brother instead, the tough one, the real businessman. Today I owned every square inch of the company that was supposed to be my birthright, and I had rescued it from the brink of bankruptcy my brother's strength had caused. But let me back up. You need to hear the whole story to understand just how satisfying that moment truly was. I grew up as the eldest son of Victor Matthews, founder and CEO of Matthews Construction, one of the largest commercial builders in the Northeast. From day one, I was groomed to take over the family business. My childhood wasn't filled with baseball games and bike rides. It was filled with job site visits and lessons on profit margins. "This will all be yours someday, Gabriel," my father would say, his massive hand on my shoulder as we surveyed yet another construction site. "If you're man enough to handle it." That was always the caveat. If you're man enough. See, I wasn't like my father. Where he was loud, I was thoughtful. Where he ruled through fear, I preferred understanding. Where he saw workers as tools, I saw them as people with families and dreams of their own. These differences weren't subtle, and they became the source of constant friction between us. My brother, Nathan, was 7 years younger, but cut from our father's cloth. By the time he was a teenager, he was already showing the killer instinct my father so valued. Nathan could fire someone without blinking. He could strong-arm suppliers into submission. He could work 16 hours and then hit the bar with clients until 2 a.m. He was everything my father wanted in a successor. I still remember the day I realized just how deep this divide ran. I was 22, fresh out of college with my business degree, working as a project manager at the company. One of our longtime employees, Frank, had been struggling with his work. His wife had recently been diagnosed with cancer, and he was trying to balance hospital visits with his job duties. When I found him crying in his truck during lunch, I sat with him. I listened. I rearranged his schedule to give him more flexibility and redistributed some of his tasks. It seemed like the human thing to do. That evening, my father called me into his office. His face was red with anger. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Gabriel?" he demanded. "Helping a valuable employee through a difficult time," I replied. He slammed his fist on the desk. "You're coddling him. This is a business, not a damn charity. If he can't do the job, we find someone who can. It's that simple." "It's not that simple, Dad. Frank has been with us for 15 years. He's loyal, skilled, and this is temporary. It would cost us more to replace and train someone new than to support him through this." My father's voice dropped to that dangerous, quiet tone he used when he was truly furious. "This is exactly why I worry about you taking over someday. You're soft. Construction isn't about feelings, it's about deadlines, budgets, and results. Period." That was the first time he said it out loud, but it wouldn't be the last. The word soft became his favorite weapon against me. Too soft on vendors. Too soft on clients. Too soft on employees. In my father's world, compassion was weakness, and weakness was unforgivable. But here's what you wouldn't expect. Despite my father's concerns, the projects I managed consistently came in on time and under budget. My teams had the lowest turnover and highest productivity in the company. Clients specifically requested to work with me because they trusted my approach and appreciated the communication. I was proving that my way worked, but my father couldn't, or wouldn't, see it. The tension between us built over the next few years. I rose through the ranks on merit, eventually becoming COO at 27, managing daily operations while my father maintained his role as CEO. By objective measures, the company was thriving under our leadership, even if our management styles clashed. Then came what I called the decision. My father was approaching 65 and starting to think about succession planning. Everyone assumed I would step into the CEO role. It was what we'd all been working toward my entire life. But you've already guessed what happened, haven't you? The board meeting was set for a Friday afternoon. All the executives were there, along with my brother Nathan, who had joined the company straight out of college and was now running our sales division. My father stood at the head of the table, commanding the room, as he always did. As you all know, I've been considering the future leadership of Matthews Construction, he began. This company has been my life's work, and ensuring its continued success is my highest priority. He paused, looking around the room before his eyes landed on me. After careful consideration, I've decided that Nathan will be taking over as CEO when I retire next year. The room went silent. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Nathan looked shocked, then quickly composed himself into a smug smile. Gabriel will continue in his role as COO, reporting to Nathan, my father continued. I believe this structure will best serve the company going forward. I sat there trying to maintain my composure as my world imploded. 27 years of preparation, of enduring my father's criticism while building my skills and proving my worth, all for nothing. After the meeting, I went to my father's office. I needed to understand. Why? I asked simply. He sighed, not quite meeting my eyes. Gabriel, you're an excellent operations manager. You're organized, detail-oriented, and the employees respect you. But a CEO needs to be tough, ruthless when necessary. You don't have that in you. So being respected by employees is a liability now? I asked. In this business? Sometimes yes. Nathan can make the hard calls without losing sleep. You take every layoff, every tough negotiation personally. That's not sustainable for a CEO. I took a deep breath. Dad, the company has had record profits under my operational leadership. My approach works. In good times, sure. But when things get tough, and they always do eventually, you need someone who can make painful decisions without hesitation. Nathan is that person. You're not. The finality in his voice made it clear this wasn't a discussion. It was a pronouncement. So that's it? My entire life preparing for this role, and you're giving it to Nathan because he's a hard-ass like you? My father's expression hardened. I'm giving it to Nathan because he's stronger. This isn't personal, Gabriel. It's business. But it was personal. It had always been personal. This wasn't about my capabilities, it was about my father's narrow definition of strength. I walked out of his office with a clarity I'd never felt before. For years, I'd been trying to prove myself within my father's system while staying true to my values. Now I realized the futility of that approach. I would never be the son he wanted, and I was finally okay with that. The next morning, I handed in my resignation. My father was stunned. You're quitting? Over this? I'm not quitting, Dad. I'm choosing a different path. This is childish, Gabriel. You're throwing a tantrum because you didn't get your way. I shook my head. For once, this isn't about you, or even about Matthews Construction. It's about me finally recognizing that I'll never meet your definition of success, and I'm done trying. I left my father's office for the last time, feeling simultaneously terrified and liberated. At 27, I was walking away from financial security and a prestigious position, but I was also walking away from the constant judgment, the feeling that I would never be enough. What happened next was unexpected. As word spread about my departure, I started receiving calls from employees, vendors, and even clients. They were concerned, confused, and in many cases, angry on my behalf. One of those calls was from Frank, the employee I'd helped years earlier. He was now a project manager himself. I heard what happened, Gabriel. It's bullshit, pardon my language. A bunch of us are thinking about leaving too. I appreciate the support, Frank, but don't make any hasty decisions. This is between my father and me. There was a pause on the line. What are you going to do now? It was a question I'd been asking myself continuously for the past 48 hours. I'm not sure yet, but I know it will involve building something where people are valued, not just tolerated. Well, when you figure it out, you let me know. I'd follow you anywhere after what you did for me and my family. That conversation planted a seed. Over the next few weeks, as I contemplated my next move, more and more Matthews employees reached out with similar sentiments. It became clear that my leadership style had created a loyalty my father had never understood or valued. 3 months after leaving Matthews Construction, I founded Cornerstone Building Group, with a mission to revolutionize the construction industry through ethical leadership and employee-centered practices. 5 former Matthews managers joined me as founding partners, each bringing their expertise and their own disillusionment with the old-school approach. We started small, taking on mid-sized commercial projects and focusing on building a reputation for quality work and exceptional client relationships. Our company culture was the antithesis of Matthews Construction: collaborative rather than competitive, supportive rather than punitive. I won't pretend it was easy. Starting a competing construction company in the same market as my father's established business was a massive challenge. We faced skepticism from potential clients, financial constraints, and the inevitable growing pains of any new venture. But we also had advantages my father couldn't understand. The people who came to work for us weren't just collecting a paycheck. They were invested in proving that our approach could succeed. Many had experienced the toxic environment at Matthews firsthand and were passionate about creating something better. My father, predictably, was furious when he heard about Cornerstone. He called it a betrayal, accused me of stealing his employees, and even threatened legal action, though his lawyers quickly advised against it since we'd been careful to respect all non-compete agreements. "You'll fail within a year," he told me when we ran into each other at an industry event. "This business eats idealists for breakfast." I just smiled. "We'll see." Meanwhile, Nathan was settling into his role as heir apparent at Matthews. From what I heard through the grapevine, he was running the company exactly as our father would, with an iron fist and a laser focus on short-term profits. 2 years passed. Cornerstone grew steadily, building a portfolio of successful projects and a reputation for excellence. We weren't yet at the scale of Matthews Construction, but we were profitable and expanding. More importantly, our employee turnover was practically non-existent and our client satisfaction scores were off the charts. Then came the recession. Construction is always hit hard when the economy turns, and this downturn was particularly brutal. Projects were canceled, funding dried up, and many established companies found themselves struggling to survive. At Cornerstone, we had anticipated the slowdown and prepared accordingly. We had maintained healthy cash reserves rather than distributing all profits to shareholders. We had diversified our project types to avoid over-reliance on any one sector. And most importantly, we had built relationships strong enough to weather the storm. When cuts became necessary, I was transparent with our team. I took the largest pay cut myself, followed by our executive team. We reduced hours across the board rather than laying people off, ensuring everyone could keep their benefits during the crisis. We found creative ways to keep our people employed, taking on smaller projects we would normally pass on, offering maintenance services to past clients, even temporarily lending out our skilled workers to companies in less affected industries. It wasn't perfect, but we survived without losing a single employee to layoffs. In fact, our transparent approach during the crisis only strengthened our culture. Matthews Construction took a different path. From former colleagues who had stayed behind, I heard that Nathan's response to the recession was swift and brutal. Mass layoffs, slashed benefits, abandoned projects, squeezed vendors, all in the name of preserving the bottom line. "That's how you survive in this business," my father reportedly said during a particularly tense board meeting. "You cut the fat quickly and without remorse." But something unexpected happened. The approach that had worked for my father during previous downturns was failing Nathan now. The construction industry had evolved. Relationships mattered more. Reputation mattered more. And Nathan was burning bridges at an alarming rate. Clients whose projects were abruptly abandoned mid-construction never forgot. Employees who were unceremoniously dismissed after years of service told everyone who would listen. Vendors who were strong-armed into impossible terms found other companies to work with when the economy improved. 3 years into the recession, Matthews Construction was in serious trouble. Their stock had plummeted. They'd lost several major clients. Their best remaining employees were jumping ship, and rumors of bankruptcy were swirling. I received a call I never expected. It was my father. "Gabriel," he said, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "I think we should talk." We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. My father looked older, tired in a way I'd never seen before. The recession had taken its toll on everyone, but there was something more here. This was a man watching his life's work crumble. "Matthews is in trouble," he said after we'd settled with our coffees. No preamble, no small talk. "I've heard the rumors," I replied carefully. "They're worse than rumors. We're 6 months from bankruptcy at the current rate, maybe less." I waited, sensing there was more. "Nathan?" He hesitated, and I could see how difficult this was for him. "Nathan has made some decisions that have accelerated the decline." That was as close to criticism of his chosen successor as my father would ever come. I resisted the urge to say, "I told you so." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said instead. "Why are you telling me this?" My father looked at me directly for the first time in our conversation. "Because I want to know if you'd consider coming back. The board thinks you could help right the ship." I nearly choked on my coffee. "You want me to come back and clean up Nathan's mess?" "As what exactly?" "As CEO, Nathan would step down." The irony was almost too much. After years of being told I wasn't strong enough to lead, they wanted me to step in and save them. "And what does Nathan think about this plan?" My father's grimace told me everything. "He'll accept it if it comes from me." I took a moment to collect my thoughts. Part of me, a small vindictive part, wanted to savor this moment of validation, but mostly I felt sad. Sad for my father, who couldn't admit he'd been wrong. Sad for Nathan, who had been set up to fail by following our father's outdated playbook. Sad for all the employees whose livelihoods were in jeopardy because of wounded male pride. "I'm not interested in coming back, Dad," I said finally. He looked genuinely shocked. "What?" "Cornerstone is thriving. We've built something I'm proud of, something that aligns with my values and vision. I'm not walking away from that." "So you're just going to let Matthews fail? This company has been in our family for 30 years. "I'm not letting it fail. You and Nathan are letting it fail. There's a difference." My father's face flushed with anger. "Some things never change." "I thought you'd rise above petty revenge," he said. "I thought you were better than that. This isn't about revenge. It's about choices and consequences. You chose Nathan because he embodied your values. Those values are now proving unsustainable. That's not my problem to fix." I stood to leave, then paused. "But I do have an alternative proposal." My father looked up, a mixture of anger and curiosity on his face. "Cornerstone would consider acquiring Matthews Construction." His mouth actually fell open. "You want to buy us out?" "It makes business sense. You have assets and client relationships we could utilize. We have the management approach and reputation to restore confidence in those relationships. Our cultures would need significant alignment, but it could work. You want me to sell my company to my son? The son I didn't think was tough enough to run it?" I shrugged. "It's just business, Dad, isn't that what you always told me?" I left him sitting there, contemplating the ultimate irony of his situation. The soft son he'd dismissed was now in a position to save the company he'd built. 2 weeks later, the Matthews Construction Board reached out to discuss acquisition terms. The situation was worse than even I had realized. They needed a deal quickly to avoid bankruptcy proceedings. Cornerstone was in a strong position to negotiate, and I won't pretend we didn't use that advantage. We offered a fair price, but it was pennies on the dollar compared to what the company had been worth at its peak. More importantly, we set clear conditions about management transition and culture integration. 1 month later, I signed the papers that made Matthews Construction a subsidiary of Cornerstone Building Group. The company my father had refused to entrust to me was now mine anyway. Which brings us back to that boardroom, 5 years after my father had declared me too weak to lead. I now owned the very company he'd denied me. As I stood at the head of the table that day, I looked at each executive in turn, ending with my father and brother. Gentlemen, I know this transition is difficult. Change always is. But let me be clear about our path forward. Matthews Construction will be fully integrated into Cornerstone's operations and culture. Nathan scoffed. So we're going to start having group hugs at the construction sites? Several executives chuckled nervously. I smiled. No, Nathan. But we are going to start treating our people like our most valuable asset rather than disposable resources. We're going to prioritize long-term relationships over short-term profits. And we're going to lead with transparency and integrity rather than fear and intimidation. I turned to my father. The approach you dismissed as soft saved hundreds of jobs during the recession. It preserved client relationships that will now help rebuild Matthews' reputation. And it created a company strong enough to acquire yours when your tough approach failed. The room was completely silent. No one had ever spoken to Victor Matthews this way in his own boardroom. You thought sensitivity was weakness, Dad. You've discovered that brutality is stupidity. I let that sink in for a moment before continuing in a more conciliatory tone. But this isn't about proving points or settling scores. It's about building something sustainable together. Everyone in this room has a place in our future if you're willing to embrace a new way of working. Over the following months, we merged the two companies fully. Some of the old Matthews executives couldn't adapt to our culture and left. Others, surprisingly, thrived when given the chance to lead with more humanity. My brother Nathan resigned within the first week, unable to accept my leadership. I understood. His entire identity had been built around being the tough one, and he couldn't reconcile himself to a world where that wasn't valued above all else. My father was a more complex case. He officially retired but continued to serve on our board of directors. Our relationship remained complicated. He never explicitly admitted he'd been wrong about me or his approach to business, but his actions spoke volumes. He watched quietly as I rebuilt what he had created, using methods he had dismissed. And occasionally, I caught glimpses of what might have been pride in his eyes. 5 years have passed since the acquisition. Cornerstone Matthews is now the largest commercial construction company in the region. We've won awards for our workplace culture and client satisfaction. Our approach has been featured in business publications as a model for the modern construction industry. But the metric I'm most proud of, during the most recent economic downturn, we didn't lay off a single employee. Not one. We weathered the storm together, just as a family should. Sometimes I think about that young man crying in his truck all those years ago, overwhelmed by his wife's cancer diagnosis and afraid for his job. By supporting Frank through that crisis, I unknowingly set in motion a chain of events that would transform an industry. Frank is now our Chief Operations Officer and one of my most trusted advisors. My father attended our company's 10th anniversary celebration last month. He's older now, softer around the edges in ways that go beyond the physical. After a few drinks, he pulled me aside. "You know, Gabriel," he said, his voice gruff with emotion, "you built something better than I ever could. Different than what I imagined, but better." It wasn't quite an apology, but from my father, it was everything. So what's the lesson here? That traditional notions of strength and weakness often have it backward. That empathy and compassion aren't liabilities. They're superpowers in disguise. That sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, but building something so undeniably successful that it forces others to question their fundamental assumptions. And if you're out there feeling too soft for your industry, too empathetic, too concerned with the human side of business, take heart. The world is changing. What was once dismissed as weakness is increasingly recognized as the most sustainable form of strength. True leadership isn't about being the toughest person in the room. It's about creating environments where everyone can contribute their best. It's about making difficult decisions with humanity rather than callousness. It's about building success that doesn't require others to fail. My father couldn't see that. Maybe yours can't either. But that doesn't make it any less true. The company bears my name now, Matthews Cornerstone Building Group. Not because I needed my name on the building, but because I wanted to honor the legacy my father started, even as I transformed it into something new, something better, something built to last. In the end, I didn't just inherit my father's company, I earned it, and I did it without compromising the very qualities he mistook for weakness. That's a foundation strong enough to build anything on.